Disclaimer. This video is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The information provided in this video should not be relied upon as medical or professional advice. Always consult with a qualified professional, such as a doctor, licensed counselor, or legal expert, for any questions or concerns you may have regarding your specific situation. We do not assume any responsibility for any actions taken based on the information provided in this video.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. This time, we're really going beyond just surface level stuff about recovery.
Yeah, we're going deep.
We're diving deep, exactly, specifically into the process of change. We're going to be talking about this idea of progress over perfection.
Yeah.
Our guide for this whole thing is going to be Chapter 1 of a resource that focuses on substance use recovery and, mastering emotions and all of that.
It's a really cool chapter because it really changes how we usually think about recovery. Like instead of, trying to find that instant, like before and after kind of transformation. Yeah, it wants us to really, be okay with all the little things that make up the journey, all the details.
Right, because, let's be real. If we're expecting this magical, perfect transformation overnight,
right,
we're just setting ourselves up to, be disappointed.
Right. For sure, yeah. And, the source uses this analogy of progress. Like, imagine it's a bunch of steps leading you to a healthier life. And each step, even a tiny one, it's a win. You should celebrate it. It's about recognizing that real change, like deep down change, that takes time and effort.
That makes sense. But I'm wondering, if we only focus on these little steps, do we, lose sight of the big picture? How do we keep aiming for those bigger changes while still celebrating all those little wins along the way?
That's a great question. I think the key here is being intentional. You're not getting lost in the small steps, but using them like building blocks. So each little step, when it's lined up with your main goal, like your big goal, it all adds up to that bigger recovery picture.
So it's like, you have a destination in mind, but you focus on each step you need to take to get there.
Exactly.
I can see how that would be, empowering.
Yeah.
Feeling in control, even if it's just one tiny step at a time.
Yeah, that feeling of being in control is so important, especially, when you're just starting out in recovery and everything just feels like too much. And, the source also talks about accepting your imperfections, which is really powerful.
It is interesting because so often we're told to aim for perfection.
Right.
Especially in things like recovery, where it feels like, the stakes are so high. So how does this chapter redefine the role of imperfections on the whole recovery journey?
Well, it uses this image of a painting. It says that the flaws in a painting, they give it character. It suggests that our challenges, the things we struggle with, they actually add depth to our lives. They make our stories unique.
Wow, that's a really thought-provoking way to look at it. Imperfections actually make our experiences richer.
Yeah, they give us texture.
So how do we actually apply this idea of embracing imperfections in the real world of recovery? Wouldn't that make us complacent?
That's a good point. It's not about accepting being just average. It's about understanding that setbacks are going to happen. It's about changing how you see them. Instead of seeing them as failures, you see them as chances to learn and grow.
So it's about building resilience, that ability to bounce back from those tough times and actually use them to grow.
Exactly. And then the source brings in this really interesting metaphor, the caterpillar turning into a butterfly. It's saying that recovery, just like that change, it happens in stages. And each stage is really important for you to completely transform.
Okay, I'm interested. Tell me more about those stages.
All right, so the chapter lays out these key stages: self-discovery, healing, growth, and then the final stage, empowerment.
I imagine each stage has its own, challenges and victories.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And the source really emphasizes that just like a caterpillar can't just instantly turn into a butterfly, we can't rush or skip stages in our own recovery. Each stage has a purpose. Each one contributes to the whole process.
That makes me think about how important patience is in recovery. It's not about rushing to the finish line.
Right.
It's about giving yourself the time and space to go through each stage, really experience it, and learn from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this ties in perfectly with another important point from the chapter, taking life one day at a time.
That's something we hear a lot.
Right.
But what does that actually look like, practically? How do we go from this big idea of recovery to dealing with the day-to-day stuff?
The source says it's about focusing on the choices you're making today, making sure they match up with your goals. It's about not getting stuck in the past, thinking about what you should have done, or worrying about the future, about all those what ifs. Just make the best choices you can right now, in this moment.
So it's like breaking down that huge, overwhelming task of recovery into smaller, more manageable pieces.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
could see how that would take some of the pressure off.
Right. It makes the journey feel less overwhelming. It's about going from feeling like you're just along for the ride to like being the one in control, the driver.
And that feeling of being in control, that's so crucial to feeling empowered to face those challenges that are going to come up.
For sure. And the chapter also really emphasizes the importance of support in this process. It says you can't recover alone. You need to surround yourself with people who get it, who understand what you're going through, people who offer encouragement and create a space where you feel safe to share your struggles and your victories.
I've always wondered, like, what kind of support is actually the most effective for people in recovery? Is it more about, professional help? Or is it having a strong network of friends and family?
It's actually both. The source talks about the value of therapists, support groups, friends, family, anyone who can truly offer support and understanding. It's about building a network that can give you different types of support depending on what you need.
So it's about recognizing that we don't have to go through this alone and actively creating a community that can help us, navigate those ups and downs.
Exactly. It's about using the power of connection, the power of shared experiences.
This has been so insightful, honestly. It really changes how we usually think about recovery. There's one point I'd like to dig into a little deeper. The chapter talks about celebrating victories, both big and small. But how do we actually do that? What does that look like in our day-to-day lives?
That's a great question. And it can be really personal. What feels like a huge win for one person might not feel like much to another.
So there's no, one right way to celebrate.
Right, exactly. But the key is to be aware of those wins, no matter how small they might seem, and then celebrate them in a way that feels real and authentic to you.
So it could be anything from, writing down a good choice you made in your journal to sharing a win with a friend who supports you, or even just taking a minute to, appreciate your own progress.
Exactly. It's about noticing those moments and choosing to celebrate them in a way that feels meaningful for you.
This is all so fascinating. It feels like we're really starting to understand this idea of progress over perfection.
Yeah.
And I know there's more to unpack in this chapter.
Oh, yeah. We've barely scratched the surface of understanding progress over perfection and how it fits into the recovery journey. There's still so much to discuss, like practical strategies for really adopting this mindset and using it in your own unique recovery journey.
So we're back, and we're going even deeper into this idea of progress over perfection in recovery. Before the break, we were talking about celebrating those small wins.
Yeah.
And it really got me thinking about how personal that is for each person.
It's true. There's no rule book for celebrating those victories,
Yeah.
But the cool thing is, just by acknowledging those wins, however you do it, it reinforces those positive actions. It's like you're giving your brain a little reward for heading in the right direction.
Oh, that's a great point. It's almost like training yourself to focus on the positive stuff, which seems especially important when you're going through those rough patches in recovery.
Exactly. The chapter really stresses how important those small wins are, maybe even more than the big ones.
It makes me think of like a snowball.
Yeah.
Each little victory gives you more momentum, makes it easier to get to the next one, and then the next, and so on.
Right.
It's not about waiting for this massive, life-changing moment. It's about those consistent, everyday choices. They're what lead to real transformation.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And this whole idea of consistency actually brings us to another important point from the source. Recovery isn't about fitting into some mold of what it should look like. It's about embracing your own personal growth, doing it your way.
That really challenges this idea that there's one right way to do recovery, right? So many people compare their journey to others, and it can be so discouraging.
Absolutely. The source reminds us that everyone's path is different. What really matters is paying attention to your own progress and defining what success means for you based on your values and what you want to achieve.
So it's like tuning out those outside expectations and really listening to your own inner compass.
Yeah.
I can see how that change in perspective could be really freeing, especially if you feel pressured to fit into a certain image of what recovery should be.
It is. That feeling of freedom is so key for long-term success. There's this one analogy in the source that really stuck with me, the idea that recovery is like a masterpiece, a work of art.
Ooh, that's powerful.
Yeah.
What do you think the author's trying to say with that metaphor?
Well, I think it's about seeing your journey as a creative process, just like creating a piece of art. Those imperfections, those challenges we've been talking about, they become like the brushstrokes, you know? They add depth and meaning to your story. They actually become part of what makes the final piece so beautiful.
That's a beautiful way to think about it. It's like taking those struggles, those things we might see as flaws, and turning them into something beautiful, even powerful.
Exactly. And it reminds us that the journey itself is just as important as where you end up.
You know, thinking of recovery as a masterpiece, it makes me think about control. How much control do we really have over our own recovery? Addiction can be so unpredictable.
That's a really thoughtful question. I think the key is focusing on what we can control. The choices we make every day, our mindset, how committed we are to the process.
Okay.
Even though we can't always control what happens around us or those initial urges, we can control how we react to them.
So it's about building that feeling of being in control,
Yeah.
even when recovery throws curveballs.
Exactly. And speaking of things we can't control, the source also highlights how important support systems are in recovery. It emphasizes that no one goes through this alone and encourages us to build a community of people who understand the journey.
You know, for someone who's just starting out, the idea of reaching out for help can be super intimidating.
It can be, yeah.
What advice would you give to someone who's struggling to take that first step?
That's a normal feeling. It's important to remember that asking for help is actually a sign of strength, not weakness. My advice would be start small, reach out to someone you trust, even if it's just to tell them you're going through a tough time. You don't need to have all the answers or pretend to be okay. Just be honest about what you're feeling.
That's such good advice. Starting small and being yourself.
Yeah,
I think that's important for any kind of support system, not just in recovery, but in life too.
I agree. The source also talks about self-compassion, which is really important in recovery. It suggests that treating yourself with kindness and understanding, especially during those tough moments, can really help you succeed.
That makes sense to me. It's easy to fall into self-criticism when I hit those bumps in the road.
Right.
But I can see how being kind to yourself, practicing self-compassion, could make a huge difference in staying motivated and resilient.
Exactly. And the source gives some specific tips for practicing self-compassion, which I think could be really helpful for our listeners. One that stood out to me was this idea of talking to yourself like you'd talk to a close friend who is going through the same thing.
Ah, that's a great tip. It's about quieting that inner critic and becoming your own cheerleader, especially when things get hard.
Yes. It's about recognizing that we're all human, we all make mistakes, and those mistakes don't define who we are. They're just chances to learn and grow.
This conversation makes me think about how these ideas, this progress over perfection, can apply to other parts of life too, not just recovery.
Totally. I think it's a universal idea.
Right.
It can be used anywhere you're trying to make a positive change, whether it's in your relationships, your work, or just your own personal growth. It's about shifting your focus away from that impossible idea of perfection and instead embracing the journey of growth.
Right.
Accepting that setbacks are just a natural part of the process.
It's like giving ourselves permission to be human, to mess up, and to learn from it all.
Exactly. And I think that change in perspective can be incredibly freeing and empowering.
This has been such an insightful conversation. It feels like we've just scratched the surface of this chapter, though. There's so much more to explore.
Oh, there is. That's what's so great about learning and growing. It's a continuous journey.
And that's a great place to pause. We'll be back to continue our deep dive into the transformative power of progress over perfection. And we're back, wrapping up our deep dive into Chapter 1. This idea of progress over perfection, it really sticks with me. It goes way beyond just like recovery, you know?
Yeah, I agree. It's such a powerful way to think about change in any area of life. This chapter really drove home for me that recovery is more than just overcoming an addiction. It's about embracing a whole new way of being, a way of life that prioritizes growth and self-compassion, remembering to appreciate those small steps forward.
Right, it's like a guide for creating a life that feels real and true to who you are, a life that matches your values. But this chapter also says that you don't do this alone, right? You need others.
Absolutely. That's one of the things I find most inspiring about this chapter, the emphasis on connection and community. It says it clearly, nobody recovers by themselves. There's so much power in shared experiences. Finding other people who really get what you're going through can completely change your life.
So for someone just starting out on the recovery journey, what's the most important thing to remember about building that support network?
I think it's realizing that reaching out for help isn't a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of amazing courage and self-awareness. And it's about starting small, like reaching out to one person you trust, maybe just to say, hey, I'm struggling. You don't have to have it all figured out. Just that act of reaching out, that connection can make a huge difference.
That makes me think about all the different types of support that are out there. We talked about professional help and personal networks before, but are there other kinds of support that might be especially helpful when you're trying to embrace this idea of progress over perfection?
You're right. I think support that focuses on building self-compassion and resilience is so valuable. This could be stuff like practicing mindfulness or getting involved in creative activities that give you that sense of accomplishment, even just connecting with nature. Anything that helps you tap into your inner strength, anything that helps you be kinder to yourself in your own head.
This makes me realize how much all these pieces of recovery fit together. Progress over perfection, self-compassion, having a strong support system, they all seem to work together to create this foundation for real, lasting change.
Yeah, they really do. And I think one of the most important things this chapter teaches us is that it's okay to have ups and downs in recovery. It's normal. It acknowledges that there will be setbacks, but it also tells us to see those challenges, not as failures, but as chances to grow and learn.
Yeah, that change in perspective, I think it's something we could all benefit from, whether we're in recovery or not. Life is full of challenges, right? And it's so easy to get discouraged when we hit those bumps in the road.
For sure. And this chapter offers a new way of looking at things. It's like it's saying, hey, it's all right to stumble. It's okay not to be perfect, as long as you keep moving forward one step at a time.
This whole idea of progress over perfection, it feels like a more sustainable approach, a kinder approach to recovery and to life in general.
Totally agree. It's about letting go of that pressure to have everything figured out and instead focusing on the journey, the process of becoming.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive into Chapter 1. I feel like we've covered so much ground, but there's always more to learn, right?
Oh, there always is. That's the beauty of learning and growing. It never ends.
I think that's the perfect way to wrap things up. So listeners, I hope this deep dive has given you some new insights into the power of progress over perfection, not just for recovery, but for everything you do in life.
Remember, change takes time. Embrace the journey, celebrate every win, no matter how small, and be kind to yourself along the way.
That's it for this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep embracing progress, not perfection.